It was Prime Minister's Questions today. Understandably, the lawyer, Keir Starmer, was busy tying the PM up in knots over the tax affairs of Nadeem Zahawi, the Conservative Party chairman. He's still there in place. We'll hear much more about that story over the course of the next few weeks. The other big line that Keir Starmer chose to go on was law and order, or in particular, the failure of the parole board. And he focused on the man out on parole who committed that horrible murder in East London. But what he didn't say, and what many other MPs who raised the issue of children, migrant children, going missing in large numbers from hotels, what none of them want to talk about in the House of Commons, and no one did, was the other horrific crime that we learnt about yesterday, which of course was a young Afghan man who claimed to be 14 when he was actually 20, that committed a murder in Bournemouth last year and today was sentenced for life. No one seems to consider in Parliament that of all the children that are going missing from hotels, and by the way, 75% of them are deemed to be Albanian children, many of them probably aren't children at all. Later on this afternoon, there were marches in Parliament Square for refugees welcome. Well, you know what? This country has always welcomed genuine refugees, but many of us feel that what's happening in the English Channel is nothing to do with that. I can't think of an issue in which the House of Commons is more detached from the rest of the country. Well, all day in the freezing cold down in Dover, GB News' home and security editor Mark White has been there, and he's prepared this package for us. And it's a very interesting package because it talks about plain clothes military being on the beaches. So I want to ask you, just how much of a threat do you think some of these people may pose? Farage at gbnews.uk. Let's see what Mark White found out today.
Just before first light, the Border Force vessel Volunteer slipped into Dover Harbour. On board, around 100 people taken off two small migrant boats. During weeks of winter storms, there have been few in the way of weather windows where conditions are calm enough to allow small boats to cross. But the criminal gangs are patient, and after operating for the past 4 years, they're now expert at reading the wind and the tides. So on the few occasions the weather allows, the people smugglers launch their small boats en masse. By mid-morning, around 300 Channel migrants had been taken to Kent after they were picked up from half a dozen inflatables. The Prime Minister has vowed to make tackling the small boats crisis a top priority. The bad weather of late, meaning relatively low numbers arriving here, has certainly eased the pressure on the government. But as this latest surge shows, the moment weather conditions improve, the boats are back. As we filmed, military personnel left Dover Harbour in two rigid inflatables to patrol some of Kent's beaches, looking for any small boats that might have made it past the Border Force and Navy vessels out in the Channel. GB News has been told that other members of the military are now routinely patrolling some beaches on foot as well. Into the afternoon, the boats kept coming, just before the weather window closed again, with windy conditions now expected until the weekend. In just a matter of days, Border Force will once again take control of Channel migrant operations from the military, who've been coordinating these patrols since last April. But the pressure on the government is unlikely to ease just because the authorities are better at spotting and intercepting small boats. Stopping the trade in Channel migrants is the ultimate goal, but even the government admits that won't be a quick or simple job. Mark White, GB News, Dover.
Well, Mark White now joins me live from Dover Harbour. Mark, good evening.
Evening, Nigel.
Now, I followed this from the very start of the crisis. Your report tonight is the first time, Mark, I've heard of plainclothes military officers patrolling the beaches. I'd not heard that before. I'm sure no one had. Is this because of what happened at Aycliffe before Christmas, when somebody had come onto a beach and broke into a house and it caused a hell of a panic? Is that what they're fearful of?
I think there's certainly some concern that the way that the migrant boats coming across have been operating of late is a way in which, especially with Albanians on board, they don't want to fall into the hands of border force. They want to try to make it to the coastline. So increasingly they've been trying to do that, and we've been getting these very worrying reports of some boats, more so than ever really in recent months, that have been beaching, and then people, of course, wandering into local communities, desperate to get away, of course, knocking on people's doors, asking for rides, asking for use of the phone, and generally being really quite threatening and intimidating. So we've got, from what we understand from our sources who've seen these plainclothes personnel down on some of the beaches in Kent, are these patrols off that area. We saw rigid inflatable military vessels out there today as well, zipping along the coastline as well. As you know, Nigel, just within a matter of days, Border Force will be taking over command of the operations again in the English Channel. The military have been running it since April of last year, but it will revert to a new small boats operational command, still involving the military in a big way, as well as the National Crime Agency. The government says that this will be much more effective and efficient in dealing with the Channel small boats situation. But yes, it will be certainly probably more efficient at spotting them and trying to intercept and take them on board. Will it actually stop them taking to the water in the first place? Well, that, as I said in the report, there is a much longer and not so simple task to do.
I suspect that all that means, Mark, is we become a much more efficient taxi service for the criminal gangs who are making millions every week when it's calm out of this trade. In terms of security, this man that was convicted and sent to prison for life today, who claimed he was 14, he was actually 20. But the problem is, if people arrive, and as you and I have witnessed ourselves, throwing their iPhones and their documents into the Channel, I mean, we literally surely do not know the identities of most of the young men that come in.
Yeah, there is a people smuggling industry that's underway where the criminal gangs in the first instance give that advice to those who want to come here to the UK, that if they want a successful asylum process, the best thing to do is just have a convincing backstory, and that will often mean really ditching who you are, where you've come from, and a background that may not qualify for asylum, and reinventing one. And to do that, you throw all your documents away, you come up with a different name, you maybe come from a different part of the world, and it's so difficult, as you can imagine, for UK authorities to then get a handle on who they are. And of course the flip side of not knowing who they are is how dangerous they are. And we know, because authorities have told me, they suspect there are hundreds of asylum seekers who come into this country who are criminals, people with criminal records who've got through our asylum system. They're now in hotels around the country, because it only takes a fraction of the almost 46,000 who came across last year to have had a criminal record, and there you're up to hundreds, and that's what they believe. And when they're all, of course, Nigel, mixing about aimlessly in hotels with nothing to do of a day and an evening, then the propensity for some of them to get into trouble is always there. And if there are criminals amongst them, it's all the greater risk, of course.
Mark White, great reporting from Dover today, great exclusive, depressing story, but thank you for being with us right throughout the day here